Not Common Sense, a podcast created to help you cut through the crap and feel confident in your finances. Get ready to be a money savvy genius because you're about to receive the financial education you've always needed. We all feel super stressed and mega depressed about money. If you're anything like the majority of millennials, including me, chances are that even thinking about money gives you anxiety. But that's why on today's episode, we're talking to Jessica Moorhouse, millennial money expert, accredited financial counselor of Canada, speaker, award-winning personal finance blogger, and host of the popular More Money podcast. Hi, Jessica. I'm so excited to talk to you. How are you doing today?
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Jessica took a left turn and launched her first personal finance blog in December 2011. She then launched the More Money podcast in 2015, which now has almost 2 million downloads. That is insane.
I know.
Such an accomplishment.
And almost 300 episodes. I don't know how that happened, but here we are.
Wow, I love it. Since then, she's been the go-to millennial money expert in Canada, having been quoted in the media hundreds of times, in addition to being a regular guest on CTV News' Mind the Gap panel since 2018. She also gives presentations throughout North America to share her expertise and down-to-earth financial advice, and teaches students how to build wealth by investing through her online course, Wealth Building Blueprint for Canadians. What words come to mind when you think of money? Wealth, happiness, retirement. How about stress, fear, and anxiety? That's more like it. Millennials know all too well how stressful opening mail can be. It's not the mail that's scaring us away, it's what's inside. Bills. So many young people stress about money and feeling overwhelmed by just the thought of it. Opening your bank account to see how much you owe on your credit card is intimidating, which is honestly why I avoid doing so most of the time. The minimum monthly payments just aren't cutting it. We're seen as afraid to invest, but the reality is that we aren't just afraid to invest, we're afraid of facing our money in general. So 41% of millennials feel chronically stressed about money. That's almost half of us feeling anxious about money every single day, which is crazy. Why do you think that young adults are constantly stressed about what's going on in their bank account?
It's a big question, isn't it? And I think a lot of that is because we wrap money into our own sense of self, our identity, and ultimately our self-worth, which is definitely something that I've been trying to talk to millennials, but honestly, you find that in every single generation. We identify, sometimes a big portion of who we are with our careers. And that also comes into how much we earn, how much we owe, what do our bank accounts look like? What do our investment accounts look like? Because there's a lot of shame, there's a lot of judgment. I mean, I think we've all either been in a situation where we were ashamed about how little we earned or our financial situation. I definitely felt like that throughout my whole 20s. I was very embarrassed because I thought, because no one talks about money, I just assumed everyone earned more than me. And little did I know, most people in their 20s were probably making around the same. Like no one was making good money, at least in the circles that I was in my 20s. And I think the other side of it too is a lot of people are kind of judgmental of other people. Could be a defense mechanism because we want to make ourselves feel better. And we're like, at least we're not as bad as so-and-so. We're not in this much debt. And so because of all of that, there's a lot of emotions wrapped up into money. And I think a lot of us, especially with the last year, are starting to unpack that.
That's really good insight. Because when you think about meeting someone for the first time, like one of your first questions are, what do you do? Like we ask about their job right away, right?
Yeah. So no, I thought you were going to say, how much do you make? I'm like, that's not my first question meeting a new person, but I'm always thinking it secretly, depending on what their wardrobe is or their purse. I'm always just like, what do they do for a living and how much do they earn?
Well, I actually come from a background of TikTok, and there's actually a lot of popular TikTokers who made a following by literally going up to people with expensive cars and asking, what do you do for a living?
Oh, I would love to do that. That is one of the things that, back, about over 4 years ago, I worked on Bay Street in, the most corporate kind of culture you can imagine. And constantly, you'd go for lunch and there's like this whole kind of downstairs area, kind of mini city really. And you can walk all the way, through the path and to Eaton Center. And I constantly be looking at people's wardrobes, their purses, just what they were kind of having on themselves to represent, their success. Like that's ultimately why you kind of look a certain way. You wear heels because you want to look important or confident and whatnot. And so I was constantly thinking about how much do these people earn? Like I know how much I earn and I can't afford that. But we work in the same building. And so I think we're constantly also comparing ourselves to others, which is something that I think a lot of us too in this past year being stuck at home and then online are realizing not healthy. This is not a healthy thing for us to continue to do. So how do we kind of get back to what's actually important, which is okay, what about me? And not in a selfish way, but a self-care way. We need to stop looking outward and, comparing ourselves to others because we actually don't know anything about their situation, their background. A lot of people that we may consider, oh, they must have a lot of money. Otherwise, how could they afford that? Why are you assuming that they're paying for it with cash? They're probably using
Mhm.
credit. They may not be in the best place. So don't compare yourself to them because we have no idea what's going on under the covers or behind closed doors.
Yeah, that's so true. And when it comes to comparisons, actually, 43% of millennials are afraid that they're not putting enough money away in their savings. And then 30% of millennials are afraid that they're spending too much. So, like, I
Mhm.
totally understand this because we don't want to stop living life and enjoying the fine things of life in order to save. And for instance, have also gone through most of my 20s with the mindset that money comes and goes. So, I've definitely been in both of those positions. So, would you say, like, is there a way to find a happy medium of being able to spend on stuff like eating out and going to
Mhm.
concerts while still saving money and planning for the future?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for sure in the past 10 years since I started my blog, so much has changed in terms of how we discuss money. A lot of the bloggers and personal finance experts are definitely, the tone is definitely changing, which is good. When I started learning about this stuff, I was broke, living in a very expensive city. I lived in Vancouver back then, and it was a struggle. But one thing I realized was you don't actually have to live like super crazy frugal. You don't have to be an extreme couponer. You don't have to like eat ramen noodles forever. And that was kind of the advice back then. It's like, well, you can't afford it, then you should feel bad about the situation you're in. Like the tough love kind of thing. That was kind of the
Mhm.
tone back then. The Simon Cowell era, really, right? And that's not working for us anymore, especially us millennials who have a bunch of anxiety and all these other issues we're trying to work through. We need some positivity and some helpful advice. And so I definitely see a shift in how we're thinking. But going back to what your question was, I don't believe you have to do an extreme in order to change your financial future or even your financial picture right
Mhm.
now. Really it's about balance, whatever that may mean. So it is going to, ultimately you're going to have to make some sacrifices. Like you can't have it all. That's just not possible. You're going to have to take a look at what's working, what's not working. And so usually what I tell clients I work with or people I talk to is you really need to know first and foremost what is going on. And so that is, I know people hate the word budget, but guess what? It works. It's something that we all need because ultimately what that is a plan for what we want to happen with our money. This is the ideal
Mhm.
situation. And this will hopefully help us bridge that gap of, wow, why are we spending so much money? But we really want to save. How do we kind of connect those two so we can
Mhm.
spend money on things that do make us happy and do make life worth living, but also we're not sacrificing our tomorrow because we spent all of our money today.
Mhm. That's so true. And yeah, when it comes to planning, I feel like planning for the future is definitely on everyone's minds these days. 24% of millennials are actually stressed about their lack of financial planning and ability to save for retirement. Like I, for instance, am
Mhm.
28 and still have never put a penny towards my retirement
Mhm.
savings plan, which is a bit scary and worrying. But how should millennials approach saving for their retirement? Like,
Mhm.
is this even something we need to be worrying at this age? Like, am I too
Oh,
late? Am I
yes, it
too
is.
early?
It is something we should be worried about. Maybe not
Okay.
worried because that's not a very good feeling, is it? But we definitely should be mindful and aware of it. I
Mhm.
recently watched, a docu series that was about money because I'm a money nerd, so I'm always looking for new, information and thoughts. And it was interesting. It was, a lot of young people do have a hard time picturing the future. And fair enough. It's difficult. When someone says, where do you see yourself in 10 years? You're like, I don't even know where I'm going to be next year. Like, how can I answer that question? And one kind of experiment they did was, and I know this was like, speaking of TikTok, wasn't that, maybe it wasn't on TikTok. It was on some app last year. I remember at the height of, the pandemic, there is some way that you can use your phone and see what you would look like as an older person,
Oh yeah, those filters.
right? That filter. And that was actually an experiment devised, like I think a decade ago, not as nice as that app, but it was kind of the same scenario where people who were younger got to see what they would look like in the future. And they then recorded, does this make you feel like you want to save more for your future or less? And ultimately, because they can actually see and picture what the future would hold, they were more incentivized to actually start saving. So, maybe trying out that filter or doing some kind of experiment yourself, or really, one thing is great, talking to older people. Like, it sounds, I'm an older person, which is funny too. I'm like, I'm in my mid 30s. And so when I've talked to someone who's in their early 20s, I'm like, am I that older person to you? Possibly. But like talking to your parents, your grandparents, and getting a sense of like their finance. I mean, this is a great, opportunity to talk to your family, about that. And you may have a good sense, especially talking to your grandparents who are retired, to see what it's all about. What did they do in order to afford that? That may get you thinking more about the realities of the future and that you will eventually age. Because I will tell you, I'm 35 now. No, well, I'm 34, turning 35 very soon. And literally it happened in the blink of an eye. Like, I don't know how I got to this place, but somehow I'm this age, but I still feel like I was 20 yesterday. And so it does happen so quick. So the best thing you can do for your future is to start thinking about it and to do something about it as soon as possible.
Yeah, I like how you mentioned talking to your parents. Like growing up, though, I never really had anyone teach me those healthy financial habits. Like I was given such generic and vague advice from my parents, just like save your money. But I also come from an immigrant family and I'm a first generation Canadian. So I don't think my parents knew any better themselves, and they couldn't really pass along any good information or any of the healthy financial habits that we've been speaking about. And like, for instance, I've seen my dad firsthand, like lose thousands of dollars to poor stock investments, and to this day they're still in debt. So I definitely feel like very strongly about financial stress because I've seen it firsthand, and I'm sure many other listeners can relate to that. So like, what does it mean to have healthy financial habits?
Well, yeah, I want to kind of just because you mentioned that sounds like a lot of pressure too, right? A lot of pressure to get it right, and to also maybe, I think a lot of us too, as we age, we're gonna have to take care of our parents, and that's pressure to so many different financial struggles and obligations. Starting a family, buying a home, there's a lot of things going on the millennials have to deal with. So, but going back to like financial habits, what are some healthy financial habits? I've been talking a lot lately about using kind of the idea of, financial management or financial planning as a form of self-care. I mean, I know we all love a good face mask and, all those kinds of things. Sure. I can't wait to get a massage. Like I want to do a glow up once we're out of this situation. I can go outside. But the one thing that we can do in, lockdown in this, situation we're in is take care of our finances, because all you need is your bank statements and the information. And so you can do it as easily as just using an app, or I personally like spreadsheets, so you can have a budget spreadsheet. And really, for me, the core things that everyone should do, in my opinion, is to make a budget. So this is the plan that you want to set out for yourself. This is what I want to happen with my money. Set some financial goals. What do we actually want to happen? So what do we want to save for and why? Trip, retirement, future home ownership, starting a family. Those are kind of exciting things to maybe start with the goals and then go to the budget, because it's more fun talking about the goals. It's something you can look forward to. And then this is not as fun, but it is so essential. And the people that I do help actually start this, they're like, I'm so glad, it's a game changer, is tracking your spending. Doesn't sound exciting. No one wants to take a look, because you're opening it up. It's like going on the scale and finding out how much you weigh. It's no fun, right? You're like, oh, okay, well, I thought I was a bit thinner, but here we are. So it's kind of the same concept, but it is one of those things you rip off that Band-Aid and then you're like, it's fine. It's actually not as bad. Usually it's not as bad as you expect. Or if it is, guess what? It's okay. We can change these things. We can fix them. And then the third thing on top of tracking your spending, which is just to get a gauge of where you're at and then doing it consistently after that to keep yourself accountable. So you are trying to actually mimic what you set out in your budget, tracking your net worth, which is something I think also doesn't sound fun, is actually my favorite thing to do. I do it every single month. You don't have to do it as often, do it quarterly, semi-annually. But it's to get a sense of how much do you have and how much do you owe. Most people hate this when like I work with someone and they're like, oh, I really don't want to know. It's like, I guarantee you it's not as bad as you expect. Because I think everyone expects to be in worse debt and have no money. But usually,
Mm.
oh, you didn't realize that your car is actually an asset, or your home. Remember, you're putting how much you could sell your home for today. And then, of course, you have to put your liabilities, your debts, but put all that information in one place. You kind of take out, minus the liabilities from the assets. That's your net worth. If you track that on a consistent basis after that, then you're actually tracking your progress. And hopefully that progress is as you pay down debt, as you save a little bit more, as you invest a little bit more, your net worth will grow and grow every single month. What's better accountability and motivation to keep being smart, making good financial decisions than seeing that progress.
Yeah, I definitely love what you said about ripping off the band-aid because I'm definitely part of that pool of people who ignorance is bliss. Like, for example, paying off my credit cards, I don't do it on a specific day. I'm like, okay, I guess it's time. And I kind of like close my
Mm,
eyes and like just kind of
mhm,
check it. So I think you're right. It's important to just rip off the band-aid and then again, like work towards progress, right?
And
Um,
another, like, just to kind of jump on top of that, another great thing to do for yourself to also just give yourself some sense of we have a plan is to have kind of a set schedule for certain things. So you mentioned I don't really pay my credit card off on a certain basis. I just do it and I just throw money at it and run away.
yeah.
Having a system where you're like, for me, for example, I feel good when I pay my credit cards off in full every week, which may be a bit too
Mm.
frequent for most people. I like it because then I know on a weekly basis we're going to zero. What gives me anxiety is when I, don't check my credit card for a month and it's like ballooned to this big number and you immediately forget what you spent your money on. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what happened? Did someone steal my credit card? No, no one did. It was you. It's always me. And so having a system for me to kind of ease it a little bit and just make it less painful to check my statements has
Mm.
been very helpful. A couple other things that I've implemented that have been so helpful for people I've worked with is setting up alerts. So every time you make a purchase on your credit card or your debit card, getting an email or a text message. And it's just a way to stay mindful with when you are spending. I feel like because we use plastic or we buy things online so much, we immediately forget what we spend our money on. Or I know most of us, I mean, sometimes I find myself doing this at the checkout, at the grocery store, and you don't even look at how much you're paying. You don't even look. You're just like, doing your thing, packing your groceries, tapping your card, moving on. And you're like, how much was that? I have no
Yeah, they
idea.
asked to give a receipt, and I'm always just like, no, it's okay.
Yeah,
I
you
don't need
always say no because it's
it.
an inconvenience to have this, but you're like, maybe if I got that receipt. So that's another thing. Maybe if you're like, if I got the receipt, I would take a look. So maybe get the receipt. But for me, I like setting up just digital alerts through my bank and credit card account. So get a little email and it's like, boop, you made this transaction. I'm like, oh yeah, I did. Well, maybe I should not buy that thing I was thinking of buying because I made this purchase and I forgot about it.
That's so true.
This podcast is sponsored by Coho. Imagine a banking experience without the BS. Bank stuff, we mean. No hidden fees, no minimum balances, and none of those ugly chairs they seem to have at every single bank. Instead, this banking experience puts your money to work. Luckily, Coho has made this banking experience a reality. They're a no BS banking alternative where you can earn 1.2% interest on your entire account and 0.5 cashback on your every purchase. Their beautifully designed app also helps you budget better by automating your savings. Want personalized financial advice? Coho offers that too through their premium account. So stop imagining this utopic banking experience and start using it. Download the Coho app and sign up today.
What is financial well-being and how is it linked to mental health?
Mm. I say financial well-being is really having a good sense of what's going on right now, where you want to be, and then making a solid plan. And that could be doing it on your own or working with a professional because I'm totally for working with a professional if you need that specific guidance. And,
Mhm.
also that, person, sometimes we need that third party to talk to us. Like, we could talk to our friends and family all day. And sometimes we're like, yeah, yeah, yeah. But you get hear it from a stranger that you're paying. You're like, oh, I just learned this thing. And you're like, I was telling you this forever. So sometimes working with a third party can be super helpful, especially to when this is something. Like, I talk to people all the time on the phone. They're like, I know I've been, I should start investing, or I know I should really take care of my finances, but it's just so overwhelming and I just don't know where to start. Like, that's the number one thing I hear is like, I just don't know where to start. So if you don't know where to
Mhm.
start and you're like, I can't do this on my own, maybe, kind of hiring a personal trainer for your finances is a good starting point. I mean, I know a lot of us need that help, and they can also, bring up lots of things, talking about mental health. I mean, you can talk to these people. They're not, if you work with a good financial planner, they're not going to just talk about products or action items. You're going to want to talk to them about your feelings, your emotions, and try to work through some of those. I mean, that's a big reason why I decided to become a financial counselor. Is like, I didn't want to just give people, here's, some, financial tips and do this. I really also wanted to learn, how do we actually, talk about these things, like the things that are under the surface that are causing
Mhm.
us to make some of these maybe not so good financial decisions.
Yeah, no, I love that. And you're right. We do invest so much money into like personal trainers and like, yeah, invest money into our body and our clothing and
Mhm.
stuff like that. But we never really think that, hey, maybe we need to invest money into figuring out our own money.
Yeah, because I mean, the number one thing I hear is, I didn't learn this in school. None of us
Mhm.
learned this in school. And so all of a sudden, as adults, we're like, so I'm supposed to know all this? And some of us are lucky we've had parents that taught us. I got some good stuff from my mom. She was kind of the money manager in our family, but there's so much I didn't know. Like, honestly, I graduated university. I did not know what the difference between a checking and a savings account was, because I only ever had a savings that was linked to my debit card. I'm like, what's a check and why do I need a checking account? Like, what's all that for? I've never had the use for it. And so
Mhm.
there's a lot to learn, and it could be, again, very overwhelming. So working with someone who can guide you through it, answer your questions, can be, something that's probably worth the investment.
Yeah, for sure. Got to add that to my to-do list.
Mhm.
So you know that feeling when you're afraid to look at your bank account and check your credit score? I, for once, have not checked my credit score since I moved in here 3 years ago because it was low back then, and I'm just so scared to even know what it is at right now. And I
Mm.
know so many people my age are scared to do the same thing. So why do you think millennials actively avoid knowing about their money?
Well, talking about the credit score specifically, and there's so many things I want to clear up about like credit and credit score. So I think so many people think that a credit score is actually their financial score. Like, this is the score that you get at how good you are with money, which it isn't. It really has to do with, in the past, how responsible were you with credit? And if you made some mistakes with your credit card, you maybe missed a couple payments, or spent too much money, and then, you were in debt for a long time. These things can affect your credit score. It does not mean that you were a bad person or that you're bad with money. It just is a reflection on how you interacted with credit in the past. So it shouldn't be something that scares you, because it is something, if you actively, start, making better decisions and, paying all of your bills on time and in full, it will increase. And if you're wondering, why is it not increasing? I'm doing all these things, then that might be an indicator that there might be something wrong in terms of your credit profile. So that might be a good signal to look at your TransUnion, your Equifax credit reports and see, is there something on there that's actually incorrect, that is harming my credit score? So I wouldn't say don't ever look at your credit scores. Definitely look at your credit reports. I have talked to so many people and they're like, there was this thing on there, and that, like, there was it looked like I opened a credit card. I never opened up that credit card, and it was actually fraud. And that was actually negatively affecting their credit score. So
Mm.
as a good rule, it's important to check your credit reports at least once per year. But I know now there's so many different, online ways that you can check your reports and scores, instead of going directly to the bureaus. But definitely make that a habit, because it will be very helpful, or really, I mean, critical, if you do eventually say want to get a car loan or a home, a mortgage. I mean, that's something, if this is something that you want to do in the next few years, it's definitely important to pay attention to.
Love that advice. So money clearly causes a ton of mental stress and anxiety for a lot of people. I was honestly just talking to my roommate earlier this morning, and we were both just like, we're like entering our 30s and still so like so poor. Like we feel that way at least. How do young adults maintain good financial well-being?
Well, I'd say like one thing like that you did right was actually open up to someone and talk about it. Like the best thing that I could have done for myself was actually start a personal finance blog as a way to express myself, but then also enter this community of other money blog nerds, and we could talk about money openly online. And then it made the idea of talking about money not so scary, because otherwise no one, maybe my older sister, she's the one who kind of got me into it. She said, "Oh, I read this book, you should read it." And that's what kind of sparked my interest. But otherwise, no one else talked about money. And so, how are you going to learn about money and learn what to do and what not to do if you're not talking to people about it? I'm not saying take, talk to people and take their advice, because everyone has opinions. They may give bad advice because we're all just, learning and stuff like that. But I think, one thing I talked to someone a while ago, and she runs a financial company. And one thing she did during kind of the last market crash back in 2008, 2009 was she started this kind of money club where she and some of her girlfriends would get together and talk about their money, talk about budgeting, keep themselves accountable. What a great idea. I mean, I love a good book club. Why not do something sort of like a book club, but it's like a money club. You can still have wine and snacks, but then you can also like encourage, each other to, hey, did you track your spending this month? Or, hey, did you pay that bill? Or how's your debt going? Something like that. I think that's one great way to actually really not just help yourself, but also empower each other.
Yeah, I love that. And I feel like growing up talking about money with your friends was such a taboo subject. Like everyone was just so protective over like, this is what I make and I don't want to talk about it. So I think, yeah, making that more common among friend groups, right? And is so key. Money management seems to be becoming more of a problem for millennials and young adults. Like, I feel like most people didn't see their parents struggling to figure out their money problems. Like, the parents always seem to know exactly what to do. Or even like with my parents who had money problems, they're always so chill and calm about it. So why does money seem so overwhelming nowadays? And how do we get past that fear?
I think part of what our parents' generation did, and even our grandparents' generation did, was they were having struggles, but they just made sure to protect the children and hide it. I know my parents had struggles financially, and a lot of that, like, especially when we were younger, they definitely hid it. And whenever I asked, how much do you make or what's going on? I heard you're talking about the family budget. They'd always be like, no, this isn't for you. This isn't for children. This is, for adults only. And, that's just what their generation did. This is such a different time. What a great opportunity to teach your kids about money. And so I think that's part of the reason is we were never included in this conversation. And then all of a sudden we're adults and we're expected to know all this stuff. And even though we were never allowed to even talk about it. I remember growing up and money wasn't just taboo. It was rude. It was like improper to talk about it. You'd get kind of, told off if you mentioned it. It's just like you weren't supposed to talk about that. And how is that serving any of us if we just don't ask around, like how much do you make? Like one thing I kind of regret is lots of the different jobs I worked. I always asked how much people made on the way out. As I quit and I was on my way out, so I had nothing to lose. And then I'd be like, how much did you actually make? And it would have been really helpful to know those numbers while I was at that job, because maybe I could have actually asked for a raise or could have asked for more money at the get-go. Having these conversations, especially if you put it in the context of like the wage gap, we need to have these conversations. How, for me, I'm in, this specific role. I have a lot of friends who do similar things. They're self-employed. They run their own businesses. We often talk about how much we charge, our different rates. And it's helpful because we raise all of us. We don't want to undercut each other. We all want to help each other so we all thrive. And so the more we can talk about it, the more we will all grow and be better for it.
That's so true. And I think even like that financial well-being really relates to mental health as a whole too. Like our parents' generation never talked about it.
Absolutely.
And so it seems like millennials are suffering more with their mental health, but really we're just being more open about it, right?
Yeah, it always happened. All these things were there. And now too, we have an interesting lens where we can kind of look back at maybe some older family members. You're like, you know what? They weren't just this kooky uncle so-and-so. I think they actually were struggling with mental health, but that was never something that was talked about, or, there was no diagnosis or they weren't diagnosed. And yeah, I know lots of, people love to say, oh, or, it's such a problem now. I'm like, it was always a problem. At least now we're actually trying to find a solution.
Mm-hmm. And what I do feel like should have been talked about back in the day is financial education. And
Oh my gosh,
I
yes.
definitely feel and just believe, I really do believe that we should have gotten a better financial education when we were in school. Like, it is starting to be incorporated into schools, but I think it's just a little late for a lot of us, right? So is there a way to make financial literacy more available to millennials and future generations so that we can stop stressing? Like, what are the best resources for young adults to better understand finances?
I'd say the best place to start is really some books. It's a thing that you could do on your own if you're kind of uncomfortable talking about it because you're just at the start. You can get a book from the library for free. No one needs to know. You can put on your Kobo, and literally no one needs to know what you're reading. And then you can start kind of thinking about some of these concepts and these terms and some of these, pieces of advice that can really help you. I mean, again, that's what started it all for me. Picked up, the classic, The Wealthy Barber book, which is still such a huge Canadian classic. And it was the first time I ever read anything about money. I'm like, whoa, this is crazy. And that's what got me interested. And then I went on the internet, and this was going back to 2010 when I started looking at personal finance blogs, and there really weren't that many at the time, but there was a few. It was the coolest thing to see that these, lots of them were anonymous because they were sharing their income numbers and their spending numbers, that people were sharing their information, stuff that we all wish we could ask some, how much do you make or how much are you spending? These people were talking about it openly and putting their numbers, and you could see it was such a great education to see what other people were doing. So then I can have kind of a bit of a benchmark. Okay, they're my age, they're in a similar role, earning similar money. That's what their budget looks like. Maybe that's what my budget should look like. So that's a good starting point. I mean, we are in such a great time that it's never been easier to find the information you want for free online. I mean, there's podcasts, right? There's YouTube, there's books you can get for free at the library, there's blogs, there's so many great resources. But at the other end, I do realize when there's so many options, it can be overwhelming. And then you get that analysis paralysis, and then you don't do anything. So starting small, I'd say pick up a book or two that are maybe on some of the recommendations lists, and start with one, and then start with another. Maybe add a podcast or something, and just slowly ease yourself into it. Don't go crazy and just consume everything. It may be overwhelming. I'd also probably suggest be careful when you're on some of the forums like Reddit. They can be a lot, they can be intense. And, it's important to remember that it's opinions people are sharing. They're not facts or financial advice. So take it with a grain of salt.
I love that. Makes it definitely more digestible, I think, for sure. I feel like one of the ultimate goals for people is to make sure that they're set up for retirement. But when there's so many things to worry about before we even get there, how can we start preparing earlier in life?
How could we start? Well, the best advice I can give anyone is if you are working for an employer and they offer some sort of pension plan or a group RRSP, and they are matching your contributions, take advantage of it. It is the best way to get started. And also you'll immediately forget that you signed up for it because they will take that money off your paycheck. You don't even see it, and you won't really pay attention to your group RSP or pension. You'll get some statements, once in a blue moon, but that's about it. And you're investing automatically. You don't have to do anything. So that's number one. Everyone should do that. So many people don't. And that is, especially if your employer is matching your contributions, you're leaving free money on the table. That is money you would not get if you were not opting into this program. So do that, number one. Number two, well, first I always kind of say, because so many people, especially in the last years, like, I want to start investing. So where do I start? I'm like, well, let's just make sure there's a few things you've done before. We don't want to dive into investing before we're actually ready. And by ready, I mean, make sure you have that emergency fund, and make sure you don't have any high interest debt. So if you have some high, interest credit card debt, talking like 19, 20%, you're never going to make that type of return in the stock market. It's going to be very difficult to make that kind of money in the stock market. So maybe let's pay attention to paying off that high interest debt, and then have that emergency fund. So we're good. And then we can move on to the phase of starting to invest. Now, when it comes to where do we start investing, that is it's a big question. It's a lot. There's a lot of things to consider. Hence why I have a course that kind of goes through it. But really, it's about figuring out How much, can you start with? So typically I kind of suggest if you can start with like an initial contribution of $1,000, then we're kind of ready to go. Take a
Mhm.
look at what your options are. So your options are you can work with a bank or an investment firm. You can use a robo advisor, or you can go self-directed, which is a little bit more advanced. So I wouldn't say if you're a beginner, jump in because there is a lot to know, but it's basically opening up a discount brokerage account and building your own portfolio. So you can buy stocks, you can buy ETFs, you can kind of do whatever the heck you want. It is a bit of the Wild West. So you do need to have a plan, but those are your kind of three options. So take a look at them and then do some research. Okay, what are the pros and cons of each, and which one makes the most sense for my investment goals and just for me as a person?
I love that. Well, thank you so much. You've shared so much great advice. I have a long to-do list of things to get my finances in order. But what should people know about first when it comes to financial stress and how to keep it at a healthy level?
Well, I'd say the number one thing is realize that even though you're feeling like this, it's normal, it's natural, it's okay, and you're not the
Mhm.
only one who feels like that. I think that's the hardest thing to recognize is sometimes we just get so much into our feelings and we forget that everyone, like so many else, like even me, I feel like this sometimes. So it's okay to feel like that. But if you let that emotion, those feelings take over, it is going to stop you from actually doing something about it.
Hmm.
Fear is the biggest, action killer, right? You're not, so many people I know, they're like, I wanted to start invest years ago and I was afraid. And here we are 2 years later and I still haven't done anything. And then they regret it. And we don't want to regret anything. That's such a icky feeling of regretting, oh, I wish I did this sooner. So the best thing you can do is to recognize those feelings. It's totally normal to feel this, but then don't let them dictate what you're going to do in the future. So make a plan, after listening to this is your kind of your moment. Like I'm telling you right now, this is the time for you to start doing something about that. And so go with that, run with that, and just do baby steps. Like you said, you were making a little list. What a great idea. Make a little checklist and then start with number 1, number 2, number 3, ease yourself into it.
Mhm.
Don't feel like you have to do everything immediately. Take your time, but still don't wait. Just like, any kind of goal, the longer you wait, the harder it is to get started, get that momentum. So the sooner you can start, the better.
I love that. So for those of you listening, if you're looking for a sign, this is it.
This is the sign. This is the sign.
So taking a look at all the things we talked about in this episode, what do you think is the key takeaway millennials can have? Like what's the
Hmm.
most important thing to know about financial wellness?
I'd say that this idea, and I think this is some kind of negative self-talk that we tend to do. I'm bad with money. I'm in a really bad situation. I don't know how to get out. You can change your money story. So if you don't like where you're at right now, that's cool. That's fine. Let's change it. There's no reason you're stuck in where you're at. It's not going to necessarily be an easy road to changing, but nothing ever is that's worth getting. So just recognize that it's okay if you feel like that, but you can change your story. You can transform. Again, I always like to use my story as an example. I graduated in 2009 with a useless film degree. Okay, and somehow 10 years later, or over 10 years now, I'm where I'm at right now. And it wasn't because I got a golden opportunity. I literally learned this stuff from reading a book and then reading some blogs, self-educating, and then day by day, step by step, putting some of the things that I was learning into action. And, just kind of like compound interest, you make, one investment and it slowly grows over time. It's the same with kind of education and financial confidence. It takes time. So be
Mhm.
patient, but don't give up. And, if you need some more motivation, again, it's really about putting yourself in a situation where you are around positive thinkers, positive people in your circle, listening to some positive, podcasts or YouTubers, people that are going to lift you up and make you feel energized and excited.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your story, your advice. And I feel like it's just, just such an inspiring story knowing that you went from film studies. Cause I also studied media in school
Yeah.
and I was always like, oh, finances are for like the accounting, the business, like the math
Hmm.
people. So to just see how far you've come and how much you've learned and just how knowledgeable you are now, it's
Hmm.
definitely so inspiring. And again, thank you for your time.
You're welcome. I hope like that should just show people that all this stuff is learnable. If I can go from zero financial background with a fine arts degree to where I'm at today, that means anyone can actually learn this stuff.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
The fact that millennials feel stressed about money is actually kind of concerning. Did our parents' generation feel this way? Why do we feel this way for what feels like the first time ever? Not all of us have a business degree focusing on finance, but it's starting to feel like we need one. So many young adults are happy as a clam, ignoring the bills that collect at our door. The idea of actually facing our financial fears seems too overwhelming to even know where to start. But there is good news. It's possible to tackle your finances head on and set yourself up in a way that benefits your current and future financial situation. We've given you everything we can to help set you up for financial success. Now, download that Coho app and fly out of the nest, baby bird, fly.